All right. Welcome everyone to our monthly webinar. Appreciate you all attending. Today we're going to be doing a continuation of our misconduct pertaining to employee conduct. And today's topic is going to be about employee theft. We're going to discuss what the unemployment office is looking for in ways when there's issues of theft by an employee against the company. So the first thing, obviously, we're going to talk about here is the various forms of theft or misappropriation that can occur. And the ones that we've kind of broken it down into is there's, cash theft, which is obviously from a cash box or a cash register of some kind. Then you have the theft of property or equipment, where the individuals are stealing the property that of the company or perhaps another individual. We also have embezzlement, which is more of an accounting form of theft. And then we have some other isolated incidents, and that is misuse of the credit card or company funds and off-the-job activity that might pertain to some form of theft. So those are the things we're going to be discussing here. Theft is probably the most one of the most invasive forms of misconduct that a person can have in their company, outside of perhaps harassment of the various types. Theft is the thing that is the most intrusive, and just by the nature of that violation, you have there's a much more emotional attachment to this type of misconduct, and as you have more of an emotional attachment to it, you also have a tendency to want to extrapolate the obvious to the obvious conclusion. So therefore, if the person had the cash in their hand at the moment, then that must mean that they took it. But it's not always that simple. And as we're going to talk about here is that one of the things that you want to think about during your investigation for theft is, can you really prove theft? And just like in a court of law, this is one of the few times that an unemployment hearing officer is going to hold you more rigidly to the burden of beyond a shadow of a doubt, as opposed to the normal burden of is it a preponderance of the evidence. So those are the things you want to keep in mind when we're talking about when you're looking at theft by an employee. Now, one of the things I want to back up for just a second, because there's another thing I want to mention to you about theft and misappropriation. You want to make sure that when you are thinking about theft and you want to get restitution, make sure that you understand what the laws are in your state. Most states, under their wage and hour laws, have provisions in it that prevent employers from taking out of the employee's paycheck restitution, unless there has been unless there is a previous written agreement that allows you to do that at the time of hire. That is something that you must be aware of. You may be in violation of wage and hour in your particular state. Colorado, for example, has a very specific law that prevents employers from doing that at all. So that's something you want to make sure that you are looking into. Also, during the course of this seminar, we're going to be talking about theft and how you prove theft, but you should do a thorough investigation at all times, because you may not be able to prove theft, but that investigation may be able to uncover other more severe, as severe policy violations that are related to the theft, but that you can prove it, and that way you still can get you can still accomplish what you're trying to achieve in the investigation, that is termination of the employee, but you're doing it in a manner that you can prove. So those are the things we're going to be talking about. And the first one we're going to talk about is cash theft. Obviously, this is for certain employers, anybody in a retail or food service environment. This is going to be your most common form of theft usually. And what is the state going to expect? Well, video is always a good first step, but let's talk about video for a second. As anybody who's ever watched a National Football League game or sports in general, or even seen video on the news, video might not be as clear-cut as you may think it is, okay? So the first thing you got to look at is you got to look at the video objectively, and you got to say to yourself, what does it show? Is it clear cut? Yes, the person may have the money in their hand, but then they go off screen and they don't have, you're no longer in view of the camera. Where does the money go? Can you conclusively prove that they took that money? Okay, so the video is a very good first step, but it should not be the only step in your investigation, because obviously you can't prove conclusively under the scenario that I just described that that money ended up in somebody's pocket. One of the things you want to always have in place if you're in my opinion, if you're a food service or retail environment, is a register policy, because this helps build your circumstantial evidence, and it also gives you another avenue in which you can fight this type of thing without conclusively proving that there was theft involved. For example, is your register secured? What is the process for an individual to get into a cash register? Some of the more advanced technology now is that you have to log in to the cash registers using a thumbprint, or maybe there's an employee code using the old technology, or whatever it might be. So you want to make sure that you're looking at this the entire situation as broadly as you possibly can. The other thing that we often see that we get dinged on at an unemployment hearing especially, and this is a very common excuse that employees use when they are stealing money out of the cash register, is that more than one employee has access to the register. You might want to put in place, if you don't already have something like that, a policy that very clearly states that if this is your cash register, you should only be the only one in the cash register. If they violate that policy and money ends up missing, you're not necessarily accusing them of taking the money, but you are accusing them of failing to secure the cash register in the manner that you asked them to do so. So you may, again, during the course of your investigation, find that there's other violations of policies that have led to the loss of cash and could warrant, at the very least, a written warning, if not a outright termination. And of course, what is the security policy? I mean, what is it they are expected to do in order to secure the funds that they are responsible for? It is a reasonable expectation for those employers who are dealing with cash that they take every reasonable alternative and reasonable step to secure the cash while it's under their control. So what is it they did that was violating your reasonable cash handling policy? Have something in place that you can fall back on, because you may not be able to prove conclusively that that employee is stealing the money. Further along the line is more evidence, accounting records. What's your register tape say? What does your transaction log say? Are there a significantly higher number of voided transactions than normal? Is there a pattern of the employee conducting a transaction and immediately followed by some form of refund? Is there, again, are they following your cash handling policy? Is there something in place that you expect them to, when they are managing your cash at a register, that they're supposed to be following it? And of course, then you get into managers where they're responsible for deposits and the counting down of the tills and the safe and so on and so forth. Are they following your cash handling policies as well? Are they making these nightly deposits, and are they made timely and correctly? Are they responsible for ensuring the safety of the safe? Is it supposed to be secured at all times? Is it not left open? Again, you're looking at ways to broaden out the misconduct beyond trying to prove, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that they stole the money. You may come short of them stealing the money, but what you can prove is they have violated your policy, your security policies, by leaving the safe unattended and open during the course of the business hours. That could be something you could fall back on and use as an opportunity to dismiss them and still prove misconduct. So use all your policies to your advantage. You want to make sure that you are objectively looking at the entire process and pick what you can prove as your battle, okay? Now, sometimes, obviously, you're going to have a decision in all of these forms of theft. You have a decision to make, and that decision is, are they costing you more money than the time that you have available to you to build a case? And that's always a business decision that you have to make, and it's an important one, though, because if they're costing you tens of thousands of dollars and you don't have the luxury of proving misconduct, you may want to roll over on the $4,000 unemployment claim to save yourself $6,000 in lost funds. And because the unemployment claim is not going to be a dollar for dollar loss, it's going to be filtered down through the merit rated system usually. So keep that in mind, that sometimes you have to make a business decision and you don't have the luxury of building that case that you might need to in order to prove misconduct. Going on to the theft of property or equipment. Again, video is always going to be the best case scenario. Video can be used to establish that the person was in possession of the property or the equipment at the time that it went missing. So, but also catching them red-handed is always the best scenario. Did you catch them in possession of the equipment? But one of the other things you want to take into account is, do you have a policy that allows them to borrow your equipment? Is there a practice in place that allows them to borrow equipment? And do they allow other employees to borrow equipment? Because we oftentimes see something when an individual is accused of stealing company property. Their fallback is that other people have done this, other people have borrowed the equipment, other people have used the equipment, and then we find out there has been a pattern or a practice in place that people have been allowed to use the company equipment. Now, obviously, in some cases, like for those of you who are in healthcare, we're talking about, if they're stealing narcotics, which is a very common practice amongst property theft, is, you have to use your paper trail. And did they have access to the stolen items? What does your inventory records show? Most of your healthcare providers have very sophisticated drug and narcotic management systems. And you have to make sure that you follow through on your practices and procedures to show that individual was touching the narcotics in some manner. Again, you may not be able to conclusively prove that he or she is the one who took the narcotics, but you can prove in the investigation that they are the individuals who had access to it, who are the ones who took it out of the inventory for some reason, and then it's gone missing. Another common thing that we see when you're talking about inventory records of any kind is a policy violation of failure to secure passwords and log-on information. A lot of people who have this type of industry, they have a policy in place that says that if you are accessing the inventory, drug inventory, for example, that you are to log off each time. And what we find is a lot of times that through expediency, people share passwords and login information, or they don't secure their password. Well, again, you may not be able to prove that they were the ones who actually stole it, but you can prove that they're the ones who violated your security policies by not securing and protecting their log-on and password information. Another thing that goes, is serial numbers and information like that. Can you identify the property that was stolen? And that is through just good old-fashioned inventory control. And one of the things that is most is easiest for those of you who are dealing with sophisticated type of machinery or equipment is how sophisticated is that equipment. It's a lot easier to prove that an individual stole or was in possession of a very expensive tool that is very specialized for your particular type of industry, as opposed to trying to prove that they stole a $10 hammer, okay? So keep in mind the sophistication and the unique nature of the equipment that they may have been stealing or taking off the company property. If it's the theft of other property, for individuals, the coworkers or people who they are responsible for providing services to, is you need to get it as close to the first-hand information as you can. Obviously, not all your coworkers and not all of your customers, for those of you who provide services outside of the business area or business facility, you may have to get written statements from the individuals who felt like the items have been stolen, the money or the property, and they have to very specifically try to identify what it is that was stolen. And they need you. That's going to be one of the hardest ones to prove, because you're going to have to connect a lot of dots. And in this particular case, as we're talking about, it's beyond the shadow of a doubt, not preponderance of evidence. Those dotted lines need to fill in as close to that individual as you possibly can. So if it's theft of another person's property, try to get them to identify the merchandise. Try to get them to identify what it is that was taken, and then hopefully you can tie that back to the other individual. Okay. Now, embezzlement and credit card fraud. Sometimes these can be more difficult to prove than cash or theft property, because they oftentimes go on for a longer period of time, and they get mired up in the normal business of legitimate transactions. So the first thing, obviously, is, did they have access to the funds or to the whatever it is that they're stealing? A lot of times people will order items and bury it in the normal accounts receivable, accounts payable type of accounting practice, and have it delivered to their home. Are there checks and balances? Were they circumventing those required process? Did they falsify the purchase order that is required, for example? Again, this is going to be something that you're going to be pressed on during the course of an unemployment hearing, is what are your checks and balances? What did you have in place that required that individual to order and have the ability to order merchandise, for example? What is your credit card policy? Do you allow them to put personal purchases on the credit card, or is it strictly for business purposes only? Some employers do allow employees to purchase items on their credit card for personal use, and they then reimburse the company. What is your reimbursement process? Are they doing that? Are they following the reimbursement process? Again, you're looking for reasons and multiple angles to protect your company and to prove misconduct without having to conclusively prove that the person is stealing from you. Use all your policies to your advantage. Make sure that you are always able to have a plan B when you're dealing with this type of thing. Where are the items being delivered? That's always a classic case, is that you look at I know a lot of our employers who deal with that type of thing, the first thing they discover is that the item in question that alerts them to the embezzlement or the theft is that the items are being delivered to the person's home. Well, why are they being delivered to the person's home if it's being purchased for the company? Look for those type of things, because, again, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a circumstantial case. You're probably not always going to be able to prove and catch them red-handed in the act of doing it, but what you can do is build a strong circumstantial evidence case of obvious things, like the company paid for it, but it was delivered to their home. Okay, so build that circumstantial thing. And as you are talking to individuals and getting your initial statement, go back and get an initial statement. Why was this delivered to your home? And they're going to give you one version of the story, I guarantee you. And then you're going to go back and you're going to dig around in your accounting records. You're going to find other times where this has occurred. Then you go back to them and you say, now we found 4 more instances of this. Why is this the case? And what you're doing is you're building that circumstantial case again. You're trying to build the case as to why it is that they have multiple accounts, multiple occurrences of things being delivered to their home, and you're documenting each time the revisions in their story. Okay, so that's equally important part of your investigation is documenting how often their story changes. And for those of you who've ever been through a unemployment case dealing with theft or an investigation, you'll find that they do often morph their story from the original version. Off-the-job criminal behavior. Now, this is going to be one of the most difficult ones because in most states, you're dealing with a disconnect between the workplace and their personal life. Most states have that in view. However, you can prove misconduct for off-the-job criminal behavior if there is a clear connection to the employer or the employment. We had many years ago a classic case of an individual being accused of rape, and the reason why we were able to prove misconduct connected to the work is because the mugshot was actually taken with him wearing the company uniform, and it was in the media. That was the type of information we're looking for. So how is it represented in the media? Is the company mentioned? Are they wearing your uniforms? Are they driving the company van or the company vehicle at the time of the incident? Is it a violation of state law or a regulation? And will this result in the loss of their license or certification? Again, when you get to that type of issue, you're not waiting. You might have to be patient because the misconduct is not going to be necessarily the criminal act itself, but what leads to the criminal act. Do they lose their DOT license, for example? Do they lose their nursing license? Do they lose some form of certification that is required by their job and they cannot proceed without it? Healthcare, again, is another good example of that they have to be, if they're hot listed, for example, hotlined, and they're put on the list where they can't be used in a healthcare environment or a school environment. Those are the things then that you're looking at discharging them for, not the actual criminal behavior. Because again, you're not waiting for it to process through the criminal courts and prove that they were convicted. What you're then telling them is, you've lost this required certification, you no longer can work for us, therefore we're releasing you. So patience in off-the-job criminal behavior is going to be your ally in this, but also look at how it was portrayed in the media especially. Can you make that clear connection between their actions and the company, and is it drawing unfavorable attention to the company? Now, as I said the last time, you want to stick with issues you can prove. This is the single most common mistake. We go and we want to resist that urge to make the assumption and extrapolate it all the way out. Again, missing cash might be a case of your violation of your cash handling policy, but it doesn't mean you can prove that they actually stole it. Unless the video or you have a witness that sees them actually sticking the money in their pocket, you're not going to have as clear-cut case as you think you're going to have. Okay, so make sure that you do a good, thorough investigation and you don't go in with unfounded assumptions. That is when you're going to end up that's when you're going to end up in a pitfall. And of course, always document. This is always, this is a repeat of last seminar. Always make sure that you always document. Never shortchange your documentation in these type of issues, because you're going to get one opportunity here to prove misconduct. Always make sure that you collect as much information as you possibly can, because too much is better than having not enough. And again, it is always to your benefit to have a plan B or C. You may objectively look at that and say, we think he stole that money, but we can't prove it conclusively. But what we can prove is he violated these two policies. That may be enough to actually discharge him and still win the unemployment claim, and you're still achieving the end result of getting a thief out of your organization. And those of you, I know that we had a couple of new people on the call. Who is Unemployment Insurance Services? Well, we're a third-party administrator. We provide outsourcing of employers' unemployment claims. Last year, we had a success rate of 93%. So 93% of the time of the claims that we contested, we achieved a disqualification. So we're very proud of that. and we have a very good track record. So now with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. See if anybody has any questions. You can type them in down at the below, or you can email me at the address, email address there if you have a more specific question. All right, give it a few more minutes. If nobody has any questions, then I appreciate everybody participating. And just so you know, we are not going to have one in May. Our next one will be in June, and we will be sending out information about that. So again, we appreciate everybody participating, and we hope that you have a great rest of your week.